Good evening, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Daniel Levin Becker, presenting his new book, What's Good? Notes on Rap and Language. He will be talking with Adam Bradley, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Daniel, Adam, and the team at City Lights for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. There's just a few housekeeping things to go over before we get started tonight. In our Zoom webinar, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and to interact with fellow attendees. So if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that in the Q&A module, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so please make sure you're putting your questions there and not in the chat. And importantly, tonight's featured book, What's Good, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Daniel's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the buy link in the chat in just a moment. As a thanks for attending tonight's event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. So just enter the coupon code GreenlightEvents10 in the coupon discount section at checkout for 10% off, and that will also be in the chat as well, so you can copy and paste that. And if you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Adam Bradley. Bradley is a professor of English and the founding director of the Laboratory for Race and Popular Culture, the Rap Lab, at UCLA. He is a writer at large for the New York Times Tea magazine, where he contributes essays and profiles on the arts and culture. Bradley is the author or editor of 6 books, including Books of Rhymes, the Anthology of Rap, and the New York Times bestseller, One Day It'll All Make Sense, a memoir he wrote for the rapper and actor Common. He has also written extensively on the literature and legacy of the novelist Ralph Ellison. Bradley's latest book, The Poetry of Pop, unlocks the mystery of word, image, and sound in popular music across genres, featuring the music of Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, and beyond. He'll be speaking with our featured editor, Daniel Levin Becker, who is a critic, translator, and editor from Chicago. He recently edited Dear McSweeney's and is the editor of many subtle channels in praise of potential literature. His translated works include Georges Perec's La Boutique Obscure, Eduardo Berti's An Ideal Presence, Frederic Forte's Minute Operas, and All That Is Evident Is Suspect, Readings from the Oulipo, 1963 to 2018. The longtime Believer magazine reviews editor, he is currently senior editor at McSweeney's Publishing and English editor for the French nonfiction publisher Odile Jacob. An early contributor to the groundbreaking lyric site Rap Genius, now known as Genius, Levin Becker lives in Paris. Levin Becker's new book, What's Good, is Becker's love letter to the most vital American art form of the last half century, structured in short chapters, each of which focus on and spin outward from a particular lyric. The New York Times hailed it as an often hilarious, surprisingly moving, and always joyful paean to rap's relationship to words. We're going to start off by playing a song, and then Daniel will read a corresponding section from the book, and then he'll be talking with Adam and with all of you. So we're gonna play this clip right now.
The contribution is clear. You add one.
Hold on a moment. I just gotta load the video. There we go.
I'm on the microphone. Now, if you like. I'll settle it, I'll fuck around and arrest your whole development. I'm eloquent when it comes to digital display. I'm ready for the world while you earl off the Tango Ray tactics. My shit's Jurassic, fingers of death while you exhale and inhale with the deep breath. With my chop suey style, cause I'm a lyrical chef. I get smiles to the death, cause I be cooking from here to Brooklyn. Your shit's annoying like fat ass bookmen. On good times when I rhyme, I hit the designated area. I hope you got your shots, cause this is lyrical malaria. Spreading, beheading fools with the punishment. I live in America, but fuck this government 150 times over, sealed with lead. While y'all drink the simmer like my rhymes are breastfed. No artificial nipples, I flip the real skills. I thought I told you once I kicked the lyrical windmills and backspin. Benedict strictly for my benefit. I step on toes when I flow, don't get offended. Come and get with it, comprehend it when I kick it. I represent the real from the beginning to the end of it.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you to Greenlight. Thanks for coming, everybody who's on the call. The LA all the way to Brooklyn shout out was not intentional, but very apropos. And good evening from Paris. I'm just going to read a bit of the chapter that talks about Jurassic 5, which is in the middle of a section that's mostly about sort of being a novice in rap. Jurassic 5 was one of the first rap groups that I ever spent a lot of time listening to, and I spend a while in the book talking about what it's like to listen to lyrics that either you have no idea are quotations, or you have a sense that they're quotations but don't know necessarily where they're coming from. And there are a couple of very prominent quotations in the song that we just listened to that I didn't recognize as such. It's hard to think of a better symbolic distillation than concrete schoolyard of the supremely approachable blend of street smarts and come-as-you-are edification applied by Jurassic 5. Many of the rap acts I first listened to at length slung ancestor worship as a matter of course, but none did it quite so openly and infectiously as J5. Their 6 members, yes, made no secret of being didactic, of the degree to which scholarship and language arts were core values of their operation. More than one of their music videos features the group riding around in a repurposed ice cream truck, handing out 45 RPM records to kids. In the one for Quality Control, whose lyrics I committed to memory without ever consciously meaning to, Akil raps a whole verse in front of the city library, the camera cutting at one point to a poster that says, "You were about to enter a learning zone." What made Jurassic 5 so welcoming, such a positive early point of contact with hip-hop culture, for me and for a lot of other white rap fans I know, we tended to outnumber attendees of color at their concerts, even more than we usually do, isn't only that their music is impeccably deft and clever and imaginative, but also that their learning zone presents virtually no barriers to entry, no forbidding amorality or gore. They'd swear from time to time, but that was about the edgiest it got. Their songs sound like dispatches from a brighter world, one in which hip-hop has always been rootsy and communitarian and free of any violence that can't be diffused by framing it as another kind of language art. In retrospect, I used to have an awful lot of patience, both rhetorically and narratively, for pat concepts like verbal warfare. Concrete is a synecdoche for the streets, but streets aren't necessarily bad if the people there show respect for one another and the community, as they used to, is the implication. The group's name nods to this too, a fourth wall break and a throwback to rap's primeval crews who had names like the Furious Five and the Fearless Four, also 6 members, and the Treacherous Three. Implicit throughout their ethos was the notion that the past, old school values and the listening habits that reinforced them could always be looked to as a palliative to present ills and excesses. Pusha T shouts out George Jefferson to brag about an expensive convertible, as I discussed in the previous chapter. J5 have a song that ends with Sherman Hemsley giving them props over the Jeffersons theme song. There are limits to such didacticism, especially for a novice listener. The schoolyard is a great place to learn and be protected, maybe even be protected by learning. Again, it's a utopian vision. But it also cloisters you away from meaner, realer streets, the ones where the concrete has blood and broken glass on it. I believe Jurassic 5 trained me ideally to hear the rhetorical rituals and verbal plays in grittier kinds of rap, to recognize and appreciate the craft beneath their shock value. But I suspect they also helped keep me sheltered initially, made me a bit more reluctant to learn about Ballin and Shot Collin, to explore the avenues of rap, raw, anti-utopian, unbecomingly contemporary, that hip-hop's elders didn't vouch for. I'll stop there.
And it's good to hear those words, and it's good to be with you here, Daniel, and to give you a dispatch from a brighter world, man.
Thank you so much for doing this with me, Adam. It's a great honor.
This honor's mine, and you know, just to think about that song, to think about J5 coming out of Los Angeles, where I am today, in the bright world of a 3 p.m. afternoon. And I know that it's much later where you are. Maybe we're split in the middle in Brooklyn. And I wonder if I could follow up on one thing that you said in that passage, which was about white rap fans as a point of entry, finding that comfortable point of entry in J5. And it reminds me of a book that Bakari Kitwana published years back called Why White Kids Love Hip Hop. And my answer to him at that point is still my answer to this day, which is, I think, white hip hop fans from all racial groups are really drawn often to the same things. Now we have when and where we enter the culture is different, and those differences are key, but ultimately it's the seduction of the sound. And so I guess my question for you is, what did you hear in that track, and what did you hear in hip hop more broadly that brought you into the music?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's been probably 15 years since I read that Bakari Kitwana book, which I remember taking issue with. Like, remember thinking that he was sort of going out of his way to make an argument that was uncharitable to white kids and our motivations, because I think, as I recall, he sort of spends a lot of time on this notion that white kids are looking for rebellion and escape and danger. And I think part of the point I'm making about Jurassic 5 is that they didn't offer that. Like, maybe there was something sort of culturally dangerous about the sound, the rhythms, the vernacular, the slang, but I think it's a great object lesson in, like, think about how much more difficult it would have been for me to go from listening to like alternative rock to NWA, or to like, violent music about violent themes that had not only had nothing to do with my everyday lived experience, but also these stories being told in vernacular and with these rhetorical techniques that were totally foreign to me. So you can say that J5 is sort of a bridge to that, but I think that would also be to do a disservice to how good J5 actually is. Like, it's always a pleasure, even in the years after I sort of left that springboard behind and spent a lot of time listening to Clips and Wu-Tang and like more dangerous, gritty rap. It still always feels great to go back to Jurassic 5 and be like, they were great. They're still great. So to answer your original question, I think part of it was, I think the two things that really jumped out at me at first were rhythm. So I think I've always had a really sort of almost a visceral appreciation for orderliness and rhythm. And I learned to play the violin early on in school, and at some point I kind of decided to stop playing the violin and start playing the drums. And that just felt like much more me, much more suited to the way that my mind makes sense of things. And the other was wordplay, because I come from a family where wordplay is really, I don't even want to say it's put on a pedestal. It's just so much part of the everyday way that we make sense of the world and make our experience of the world lighter, that I think it took me a while to realize, but like learning that it was this delivery mechanism for these kinds of wordplay that are at once very classical, like almost corny, and incredibly edgy and novel and innovative, was super compelling. And I think as soon as I heard a few Jurassic 5 songs, a few songs by other acts that were sort of friendlier, but there's a group from Hyde Park, Chicago, where I grew up, called Typical Cats, who was three University of Chicago students, also very, very ancestor worshipy. But I remember listening to them a lot, and there's a line that I talk about in the book where one of the rappers, Quell, who's white, says, "I'm the motherfucking king like Oedipus." And I was like, why didn't how did I not see it? Like, of course, it's brilliant, it's amazing. How did I not see that coming? And I think trusting that rap was going to be this ongoing source of that kind of play with language, I was hooked. I was sold, and still am.
And it's a testament to that ongoing play that you've written this book, which is a journey through your mind. And I've told you this before, and the thing that makes What's Good stand out to me in my whole bookshelf of hip hop books is that I don't think there's a more intimate study of hip hop that one can find. that demands of us as readers kind of connection with you as a writer, and the sharing that you give of your own moments of insight, of vulnerability. Your love of the music comes through so sincerely in a way that isn't corny. And as I'm looking at this thing, which is itself a beautiful object, and also speaks to that love. I mean, it strikes me that one of the things we might touch on, and this is maybe the last point out of J5, is something you said about hip hop and danger. And with J5, and actually the whole crew that came out of the Good Life Cafe here in Los Angeles, if we think about Freestyle Fellowship and other groups that emerged from that scene, you have something quite different. You have rapping that's playful, that's loose, the trading of bars back and forth that we hear on the song, that speaks to an earlier moment of hip hop, when hip hop was not about making records, but was about a party. It was something that you did, not something that you recorded. And given that spirit, I'm wondering, in this current moment that we're in, if your ear catches on to that kind of playfulness, that positivity without being corny, that a group like J5 achieves, where else you might be hearing that across the music landscape today?
A good question. I mean, I think I hear it. I think what the valence is has changed for me over the years, as it's changed culturally. Like the same things that were cool and brave and original in '98, which was when Concrete Schoolyard came out, are now commonplaces. But there's even in the most hard-boiled, gritty, New York drill rap song, sometimes you can hear just like frivolity is the wrong word, but just a lightness that manages to pierce through. And it's the rapper being silly, not out of a lack of wherewithal, but just a sort of a nod to the camera and saying this is fun. I'm having fun. I'm not talking about murder because it's all that I know. I'm talking about murder because it's going to sell records and there are a lot of conventions that have been established, but I'm also doing it in a really inventive, playful way. Where else do I hear that? Man, I don't know. I think it's been codified in rap in such a pure, rewarding way that I guess not looking at it lyrically, just thinking about ways that people play with musical themes and allusion and quotation. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I'm gonna stop myself from rambling for another 8 half sentences and not actually giving you a satisfying answer.
If you stop yourself from rambling, we would never have this amazing book, because it's born out of that process. And I've had the privilege of reading drafts of the book at different iterations over the years, and I would love to hear you talk about the process of writing a book that is structured in the way that this is structured, in these prophetic fragments almost that can be read almost. I think I described it as akin to a freestyle, in as much as there is a structure with each of these brief chapters, yet also there's a space for improvisation, for a kind of associative logic that makes its way through the chapter, that draws lyrics together and juxtaposes songs that might not otherwise announce themselves as connected. So can you take us through the evolution of this book as it began as one thing and it's ended in this published volume here?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, my first thought was to write a book that would be much more conventional, much more just sort of ordinarily book shaped. It was going to be this book is 50 short chapters, each of which, as Katie said at the beginning, is centered around and spins outward from one lyric. And originally, I think it was going to be, maybe 8 or 10 chapters, each on a specific theme, certain like wordplay was going to be one chapter and quotation was going to be another chapter. And these end up being the sort of like movements in the book. They're sort of suites of chapters that take up these things. But that was sort of the default way of organizing. Here are the kind of different piles of things that I have to say about rap. Let's just group them into chapters. And then there was a moment, I think, grew a little bit out of frustration, because I think at the time I'd sent around a book proposal of a book shaped that way and didn't really get any hits from it. But I was talking to an editor who had passed on it, and he said, you know, like, I think, for want of a better word, like you haven't found this book's groove yet. You know, like you haven't found the funk that is unique to your way of thinking through this subject matter. And I was like, man, you don't know what you're talking about. And then a little later, I was like, damn it, he's right. And while I can't exactly like replicate the thought process that brought me to it, I think at some point I realized that the chapters weren't the thing. Like the lyrics were the thing. I wasn't assembling this book top down and saying, I have 10 statements I want to make and I will find evidence to support them. It was absolutely the inverse of that. I have all of these lyrics that I love and I'm in some way obsessed by, and want to kind of cobble together something out of them. So why not make the lyrics themselves the focal points? And I think after that, it was pretty quickly I started thinking about it a little more as like a mixtape, which when I think about other things that I've done, like Dear McSweeney's is a good example. That's a book of letters to the editor of McSweeney's Quarterly that I edited that came out last year. My approach to that was very much that of a mixtape also, which is to say, not grouping things by chronology or geography or theme, just sort of like thinking about what Nick Hornby says in High Fidelity about making a mixtape. Like you got to start strong, then you got to up the ante, and then you just sort of have to feel in the last few seconds of one song going out, you just have to like listen and try to think of what needs to come next for the ambiance and for the statement that you're trying to make. So then it became a little bit of a juggling game of trying to fit a logic, a sort of sequential, almost narrative logic of what do you need to know before I can tell you more? Like what terms do I need to have established before you'll follow me? And how much of your interest do I need? How much do I need to establish your interest before I can define any terms in the first place? This sort of layering on, sort of teaching you to read it as it goes along, but also trying to keep the rhythm lively, keep the dynamic fresh, never have two chapters that read too much alike. Just really give it a feeling like, the last thing I'll say is to your point about, the journey through my mind and teasing these connections out between songs that don't seem to have connections. I wanted to make it a book that reads like my experience of listening to rap, which is to say, sometimes you think you're listening to a song, you think you're focused on one thing, and then you'll hear something, whether it's a quotation, whether it's a certain flow that's inflected in a way that reminds you of something else. You're just always prey to these other intrusions of other lyrics, other times, other temporalities, other arguments. And I wanted to simulate that as much as I could on the page.
I love that, particularly given that having been around some rappers, that often is how the rapper's mind works as well, in building connections to these fragments of language and sounds and knitting them together in ways that are surprising, yet also cohere in a profound way. I should say to our audience too, that consider this a cipher, which means there's space for your voice. We will have a Q&A, but along the way, if people have questions or thoughts, interjections, things they want us to talk about, please drop those in the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that as we go along. In that spirit, I think maybe we should hear another song. Maybe you can cue us up for that, and we can listen to a song and listen to a bit more from your book. So to tell us what we're about to hear.
So this is a song called Try Me by, pretty sure she's from Detroit. I meant to double
Yep,
check,
Detroit.
but a rapper named Dej who just sort of came on the scene in 2014 with this song. And this, I talk about it in an earlier chapter that's about rhyme.
All right, let's play it from the top.
So this thing keeps happening where we pick a song to listen to, and I mean to talk about one thing, and I listen to the song again. I find that it covers so many of the other things, like some of the other topics in the book, like hashtag rap, which maybe we can talk about a little later. But in any case, what I talk about in the book is about rhyme. Try me, as Dej says it on the hook to the song of the same name. Sounds to my ear like it rhymes with Charlie. So to family, which is accordingly something more like family, and nobody, which I hear is pretty much standard. Once the verse starts, the first four rhymes are 40, macaroni, on it, and recording. There's only one conventionally perfect rhyme in the song's whole 3.5 minutes, scoring with boring, unless you count nobody and catch a body, which is a remarkably flippant way to refer to murdering someone. There are slant rhymes and then there are sheer drops. It's not that Dej can't rhyme. Anyone can rhyme. It's that she gets more mileage here out of deciding not to. With apologies to Tolstoy, all perfect rhymes are alike, each imperfect rhyme imperfect in its own way. Perfect rhyme tells us about a relationship between words that never changes. That scoring with boring is a rhyme you can find in a dictionary is useful, but also, not to put too fine a point on it, boring. But rhyming family with body, that's interesting. How does she do it? Why does she do it? Imperfect rhyme, slant rhyme, off rhyme, near rhyme, half rhyme, lazy rhyme, deferred rhyme, overzealous compound rhyme, corrugated rhyme, what have you. Illuminates something about the person creating it, about their ear and their mind, and what they're willing to bend for the sake of sound. It tells us what they believe they can get away with through sheer force of will. And I'll stop there because it goes into other examples.
Yeah, I mean, that struck me as well. I mean, just the alchemy with language that rappers can undertake through the orality of the form. You know, there's a marked difference, I found at least, in what rappers even attempt on the page versus what they attempt in performance, which is why often in a freestyle you'll hear rhymes that likely wouldn't have come out of composition, and why I think there's a difference between how Biggie rhymes versus Tupac rhymes. Tupac wrote everything down, Biggie didn't. There's a liberation, at least on the level of rhyme, that occurs when one isn't staring at the page and trying to line up syllables and sounds in that way. But yeah, that struck me as well on this song. And in addition, I think maybe among the other things we can talk about with this song, and I'd love to hear some of the things that came to your mind. One of the ones I wondered about was the tonal tension, because in some ways it's a pretty cold-blooded song.
Yeah.
It's about death and threats
It's
of murder.
terrifying.
And yet there's this beautiful lilting melodic riff that she catches.
And she has such a sweet voice too.
And she does, and it's the video actually adds even more impact to it, because it's a video that embraces community and family, those kinds of themes in ways that are downright wholesome. So what do you do with that tension? What do you think that it does for the song, both the video and song together, as an artistic statement, to have that tension in play?
I mean, spontaneously, I think it's sort of the tension is part of what makes it so effective. Like, and it almost, like, when you go back to the title, Try Me, it's like, I may appear to be very wholesome and diminutive and sweet voiced and cute, and but just try me. Like, don't take that
fuzzy slippers and all, right?
Yeah. The video, I don't know, I haven't thought of, like, I love playing this song as an example of, you know, somebody who thinks of rap as just violent or just misogynistic. Like, it handily refutes a lot of lazy stereotypes about rap. including violence, misogyny, the fact that women don't rap very much, the fact that when women rap, it's more wholesome or more sexual or whatever. And I think the video, I don't know, I haven't thought much about how the video plays into that, but I think it definitely does. And just as you say, the local sort of love in it, the product placement of all the neighborhood places, in addition to the Rice Krispies, and you know, and the T-shirts, and just like the people, I love when videos have at the end, or any time in the video, just these sort of like brief flashes of people's faces, people who are at the video shoot, having a great time representing for their neighborhood. It's, I guess I'll say it's sort of like ideally confounding as a proposition between like the medium and the message, I'd say.
Yeah, let's talk a little about similes. Now,
Okay.
I mean, there are a couple in here that jump out.
Before we do, I just want to
Yeah,
shout
yeah.
out that in Book of Rhymes, you talk really beautifully about sort of rhyme and the way that people use it. And just a couple paragraphs after where I stopped reading in that chapter, I quote you talking about Kanye West, who was very fresh in my mind because I just finished watching the documentary about him. And you described the way that he will sometimes twist words, just really like abjectly contort them so that they rhyme with each other. You describe it as the poetic equivalent of Jimi Hendrix using his amp's feedback in his solo, which I think is so great. Like it's this technological subversion that, like, I don't want to necessarily map it to Tupac versus Biggie about writing versus not writing, but like if you let yourself be confined by like perfect rhymes, and if you let yourself be confined by a certain kind of rhyme versus a certain kind of like orality, then like you won't have access to that innovation that may well become, you know, the next big thing.
Yeah, I love that. And the same, I think, holds for simile, as a matter of fact. I mean, you mentioned hashtag rap, that you know, kind of removing of the explicit like or as, to fashion a figure that's in some ways it's not quite metaphor, it's not quite simile in the strict sense, but something else.
Yeah, maybe I'll read a little bit about that.
That would be great. Yeah,
I brought up earlier, there was that quote, "I'm the motherfucking king like Oedipus," which is, you know, as we're taught that a simile is something that brings two things closer together. And my argument is essentially that this unique kind of simile in rap actually does the opposite. I said that I was first drawn to rap similes, and sure enough, both "My beats is sick like malaria," which is a Beastie Boys quote. It's another great thing that I just remembered listening to the Jurassic 5 at the very end, where Akil is doing his solo verse, and he says, "I hope you got your shots because this is lyrical malaria," which I'd forgotten about, but I love so much. But so both "My beats is sick like malaria" and "I'm the motherfucking king like Oedipus" capture something of the simile, not just their quotability, but their self-sufficiency, the insularity of their strange paralogical propositions. Because that's what they are, molecularly speaking, similes, comparative equations using like or as, metaphors with training wheels. But at the same time, they're not similes, not really. They used to be, but they've since been tampered with, sabotaged. A simile, after all, is supposed to reconcile. When you say "the engine purrs like a kitten," you're observing that engines and kittens share the quality of producing a satisfying vibratory thrum, and this one commonality brings them closer together than they began. When Juicy J boasts about having money long like train smoke, or T-Pain about having money long like a tube sock, he's not saying his money is long any more than cheddar is sharp or color is loud. He's using long to telegraph the essence of what he's telling us about his spending power, namely that it's above average in size, like a calf-high sock or a lingering plume of locomotive exhaust. When Ad Rock of the Beastie Boys says, "Your rhymes are fake like a Canal Street watch," he's not saying that posers and bootleg merchandise are exact equivalents, just that both are the opposite of real and authentic. It's close enough to convey a straightforward idea and an idiosyncratic style at once. I'm the motherfucking king like Oedipus behaves differently. The appearance of like Oedipus bifurcates motherfucking king into parallel but unreconciled ideas. The garden variety boast, intensified by a colloquial filler word you probably haven't taken at face value for years, motherfucker, and its totally literal counterpart. There's the track you thought the train was on and the one where you actually wind up. Quell isn't emphatically and non-specifically saying he's the best. He's extremely specifically likening himself to the king of Greek legend who unwittingly beds his mom and then gouges his damn eyes out. Stop there.
I love that section. And
then, yeah, so there are a
yeah.
few more chapters that follow that sort of trace these different, like if the simile is, if the word like is maybe the most, let's say, conventional way of saying like, these two things appear to be alike, but they're actually separate. There are other mechanisms that can tease things apart. And one of them is no. So when Dejlov says, I got the Tommy no Hilfiger, which took me a while. I think Tommy means Tommy gun, which is already like, there's a register shift that I don't really know my guns very well, but I'm pretty sure nobody's used a Tommy gun since like the Dick Tracy era, or that's what it conjures for me anyway. But so it's basically saying, you probably wouldn't, when she says Tommy, you probably wouldn't think that Hilfiger is going to come next. She's planting that idea in your head by saying that's not what she means. It's as wordplay, it functions a lot like that's what she said, where you're sort of pausing and saying, recontextualize what you just heard. And I'm disavowing that meaning, but at the same time, I'm putting it in your head. So yeah, there's no, and then there's what's called hashtag rap, where instead of like or no, you just pause, which is something that Drake, for instance, does a lot. He says, swimming in the money, come and find me, Nemo.
Yeah, that whole song has a series of them. And of course, Big Sean was known to use them. Drake, as you mentioned, Kanye had to pronounce its death. Yeah, Nicki, and yet it still crops up from time to time, even though the high point maybe peaked several years back. Now, besides what you call the anti-simile and the hashtag rap, what do you see as maybe the cutting edge right now of wordplay, given that, as you said in the preface to your book, I mean, this is an art form where the moment you put something down on the page, the form has shifted. It's you say it's history telling itself in real time, a telescope and a megaphone. Now, what is the real time as far as the things that have caught your ear that you hear rappers doing, whether it's in figurative language or some other field that has emerged even since you wrote the book, if there's something that comes to mind?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I feel I'm worried that I'm not going to have a very satisfying answer again. But I think like what comes to mind spontaneously is like there's already, I think, around the time that this book's like scope wraps up, there was starting to be this this trend of rappers who were more interested in sonority and kind of texture of their voice than they were in wordplay. I'm thinking of Young Thug, for instance, sort of commonly cited as the first post-language rapper, or maybe he's not the first, but like I feel like he's the one with whom we all learned that description, if indeed we learned that description. And I feel like the way in the book I present the hashtag rap, the sort of silence, this brief moment of silence as the thing that reconciles and unreconciles these two similar but different concepts. I feel like there are now some rappers who've taken that as the point of departure. And now, like, I can't think of a good example, but I think just the different kind of almost different geometries of taking a concept and placing it next to like adjacently askew to another concept. I wish I could think of a good example, but I feel like that for me is one of the things that that I bring up because it's both identifiable as like an evolution of something that I know well and have thought a lot about, and something that seems new and like almost unlicensed in terms of the technologies that I'm aware of. What about you?
Yeah.
Does anything come to mind in that respect?
Well, it was kind of a selfish question since, as I know you know, I'm in the process of editing a new edition of the Anthology of Rap, which
Yeah.
came out in 2010. And so this new edition takes us from 2010 to the present moment. And so I've been investing a lot of time and listening into the matter of what has evolved. And I think what you pointed out about the shift from these wordsmiths to soundsmiths, folks who were focused on the sonority of the voice, the timbre and texture of vocal delivery. These things are much more pronounced, which isn't to say that people just started singing in rap or just started using melody. It's been a part of hip hop from the very beginning, from a hibbit to the hibbit, from that moment forward. It's been part of the process of what it means to rap to a beat. But I do think that there is a moment where we're moving away from the aesthetic of measuring virtuosity through wordsmithing alone, where that was, Eminem was, for instance, the high point of a certain measure of virtuosity.
Yeah, just pure dexterity.
Exactly. I think we're even someone like Busta Rhymes, who has a combination really of some of the Eminem stuff, and yet also someone who's most interested in sound. And so I look at the new generation of MCs, really not even being MCs in that sense, but rappers and vocalists in a way. And that's something that hip hop has the space for. It has a tradition of it.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a flowering of it in this present moment, in response in part to the beats that producers are making that demand a different kind of vocal performance on top of it. So yeah, I'm still sorting it out, but I'm there with you on that next evolution in sound. Now, we would love some questions if folks have any. Otherwise, Daniel and I will do what we always do, which is continue to geek out about this music that we love so much, and these lyrics in particular. And I do have another question, if I can get one in. I wonder if you could talk a bit about, and you write about this as well, that the time-bound and timeless aspects of rap. And I wonder if you could take us to something that is timeless after writing this book and cutting across all of this history of a music and indeed of a culture. What are a thing or two that you would say are timeless about rap, even as it continues to evolve and shift from moment to moment?
Let's see. So there's boasting, there's creative ways of saying that you're great and more talented than your rival MCs. But even, I mean, maybe a more interesting way of putting that is something that's timeless is just finding this apparently inexhaustible vein of new ways to talk about the same things. Like there's Dej talks about, in the song that we listened to, she talks about Jada Pinkett at one moment. It's a reference to the movie Set It Off. And absolutely without looking for it, I just happened upon so many references to Jada Pinkett in rap as just in putting this book together. She does it, Dreezy does it, Drake does it. And I feel like by all logic, you should come to a point where that terrain is fallow, where like nothing new is ever going to grow. And yet somehow people just keep finding new ways to put it next to something that makes it look completely different. It's the same new geometry question. That's one thing. I think, what is this timeless in rap? Help me out here. You got something?
I mean, you're on top of it as far as I can tell. I mean, I guess I would add to that. Yeah, go. I
Yeah,
want to hear
no,
from
but I
you.
mean, back to more almost petty things like repping your geography, talking about where you're from. Garrett Caples, who is a great writer about rap and who is the editor for this book, has wondered aloud to me in my presence and in writing too, is like, why do rappers always say what year it is? Which kind of gets to the heart of your sort of timelessness and time, like extremely time boundness question. Like, why do rappers date themselves so consistently? I don't have a good answer to that, but I think there's something in that, like, just sort of parallel to the way that you'll always find somebody finding a way to make it new, as someone or other once said. This sort of parallel will to like make it obsolete, to make it identifiable as of a really specific moment, whether it's through cultural references to products, references to athletes, references to other songs. There's like, it's just this really intoxicating sense of rootedness in time that maybe like my poetic impulse is to say, you know, it's almost a self-aware acknowledgement that this is at once timeless and very time bound. But I think that would probably be pushing it. Just like it's so much part of what's codified about rap that it persists, and like whatever the intellectual justification or interesting textures of it, it is also just really pleasing. It's like, it's great to hear Kyle Lowry reference in an Earl Sweatshirt verse. Just like, I don't know where it came from, it doesn't matter. It's just, it situates it in the world in a really satisfying way.
Yeah, I think that is something that draws our ears to rap in a way that it's distinct from other genres and of music. Is precisely that. It is in conversation with the moment, and there are very few genres that do the same. I mean, strangely, the one that does, to my mind, that comes close, not nearly as far, but is in that range, is country music, which has a lot of contemporaneous references shot through the lyrics, and you know, I kind of hear them in at least in that regard in conversation. We have a question here.
Yeah, they're in
from Eric.
Anyways.
Yeah. Eric asks, as some rap gets more melody focused, how does your sense of it as poetry change? When the lyrics themselves are de-emphasized, the narrative of rap probably needs to be as well, right? At least in some ways. So yeah, how do you take that question as we get more of a melody focus? What happens to the poetics?
I mean, I feel like, first of all, I want to shut up quickly so I can hear you answer that question, because I feel like you're far more qualified to speak interestingly on it. But in a way, I feel like it just makes it harder for those of us who are trying to pin something down. Like, what comes to my mind first is transcription. And it's like, how are you going to, like, how can you get down a Young Thug, like, flight of fancy? There's one song that I'm thinking of with it's Young Thug and T.I. and Lil Boozy, and the T.I. verse is great. I know we're not so fond of him right now, but he's just like, the way he swallows his syllables, and the way he just sort of like, that's already just an incredible dilemma for the would-be transcriber, which is something I talk about at length in the book also. But then just like, the way there's at some point I talk about how Biggie, the Notorious B.I.G. was the best rapper ever at making rhythm itself semantic. That like he actually managed to derive meaning from the spaces between words, and not just in the hashtag rap sense, but just sort of the way where a word falls in a line, where it falls with respect to the bar, with respect to the other words, if it's just askew in terms of a classical, where you would expect the rhyme to hit. That was like really meaningful in the way he did that. And I think that's just amplified as we add this new dimension that's not just rhythm, it's also melody. I feel like it's on us, I think, the scholars and the would-be like butterfly catchers to find a new dimension on the page or on the website or whatever to account for it,
That's well put. And it's the challenge that I'm facing now with this new edition of the anthology. If it was hard enough sorting out the Wu's recondite slang, it's actually harder to know what to do faithfully to represent something of the poetic praxis of Thugger or whomever on the page when it's elusive to the page. And I think Eric's question is implicitly alive to the fact that it's still as important to think about the poetics of something that elides that kind of transcription. There's still a powerful poetry in the works. It's just shifted its emphasis from the purely semantic to these other expressive registers. And that's something that's, I think, going to be a wonderful challenge. I think that Genius does what it does well, which is it gives us a starting point of transcription, but what it doesn't achieve, and what it likely can achieve in its crowdsourced context, is a transcription that's attentive to these elements of poetic performance that we're talking about, the subtle gestures of it. That's not what it's there to do. It's there to tell you where the triple entendre is.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's an exciting question to think through.
I have this kind of far-fetched notion, which is a little bit like what I was saying earlier about, whether no matter how intentional it is, but thinking that maybe there's some hidden intentionality in the way that rap can be timeless and very time-bound, very knowingly, voluntarily time-bound, is the sense that like, as rap proves its excellence over and over, as rappers prove their excellence over and over and their mastery of the sort of poetic modes that we're familiar with and that we have the vocabulary to process and appreciate, there's also this will, I feel, this is my perception, and I wouldn't ascribe it to any one rapper, but this will to take that poetic genius and hide it somewhere, just like it sort of furrows inwards and hides out in a place where it becomes more ineffable. And that's I think why, like, there's this image that I revisit throughout the book of the critic as somebody who's following along and trying to keep up. Like, that's very much my experience of rap, is just trying to keep up with it and knowing that I'm never going to actually catch up, and I wouldn't want to either. But I think I don't think that's just me feeling that way. I feel like there is a genuine will to perpetuate this game, this interplay of I'm going to keep doing brilliant things, but I'm going to make it harder and harder for you to find them and articulate them.
I love that. And somehow our hour has come and gone, and
didn't see it happening.
Yeah, and yet I would love to leave folks with something, with an assignment. I'm a professor, and I wonder, Daniel, if you could just throw out some artists, even particular songs, just and we didn't rehearse this, but I just wonder if you could suggest some artists that you think people should have on their ears, whether it's from decades ago or whether it's an artist that's out and making music now. What are some of the things that you'd recommend for folks to check out if they want to continue this kind of thinking about hip hop's poetics and hip hop's musical form.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the artists that we've touched on, Drake, Nicki Minaj, um, Jurassic 5, there are like great places to start, just endlessly rewarding to meditation. My cheat answer is that there's a mix that I made that goes with this book that like it's the literal version of the mixtape that this book is sort of the liner notes to. And maybe I'll put the link in the chat in a minute. But let's see. There's a great rapper named Conway the Machine, who just put out an album last week, maybe, that he's very much an heir to the Wu-Tang, like gritty sort of violent and druggy rap that just sounds dusty and great. And he has this imperturbable flow and this just like endless wellspring of really excellent wordplay, but he doesn't really seem like he's ever trying to be funny. He's so that's the most recent album that really excited me. What else? Let's see.
I have a question for you while you're thinking.
Yeah.
Nico asks, what's an example of a rap lyric you misconstrued and maybe were disappointed once you learned the actual lyric? So I guess thinking here of what they call the mondegreen, the misheard lyric, and yeah, is there one that comes to mind?
There's one that I mentioned in the book where it's a Wu-Tang lyric on the first Wu-Tang album. Raekwon says, "I kick it like a Nike flight." And he's saying Nike flight, like Nike made a sneaker called the Flight. But for like 15 years, I was convinced it was Night Flight, like a red eye. And I was like, I was just baffled. I was like, what does he mean? It sounds so cool. Like, how do I kick it like a night flight? Like, red eyes always seemed like a chore to me, but like maybe Raekwon has tapped into some life hack. And then finally I caved and looked it up on Genius, and I was like, oh, it's Nike, just without the second syllable.
Although Genius fucks it up from
time
time to time itself. And I said Genius fucks it up from time to time itself.
Oh, for sure.
It's not a precise art form. Believe me, I can speak to that, having transcribed hundreds of songs and fucked up more than a few in the process. It's part of it's an occupational hazard, and it's born of something really wonderful about language, is that these syllables and sounds, these phonemes, can detach themselves and reattach themselves in ways that have a kind of logic to them, and an exciting logic as well. It's part of the fun of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about going on Genius is, like, I was looking at the page for the Dej Loaf song a minute ago, and there's like some really entertaining disagreement about people saying like, no, that's not what that means. Yeah. That's not exactly the same thing as mistranscription, but I think it's all part of the same umbrella phenomenon of things that we can't be totally sure of. And to me, even sometimes, as I talk about in the case of Decoded, the Jay-Z book, where he annotates a lot of his own lyrics, where sometimes I'm like, no, that's not right. That's not what you meant. That's not like the most interesting way of interpreting your own lyric.
Well, and that, I mean, not to get too literary theoretical, but I mean, that's the foundation of a lot of the latter half of the 20th century and the 21st century in literary criticism, is about these very questions of authorial intention or lack thereof, and of the power of us as interpreters of literature and music, the interpretation that is our right, and is, within, of course, the space that the work provides for us. But nonetheless, there is plenty of space to play. We have one more question. This is from Martha, and she said that she's enjoying your book, and that she says, are the Roxanne wars still going on? Which I love. So they probably are. And, for those who don't know, UTFO put a song out called Roxanne, and Roxanne Shante put out a song called Roxanne's Revenge in response to that, kind of back and forth across the male-female gender divide. And it produced a host of of imitators, and over the span of time in that early to mid 80s period.
It was like, yeah, it was like a 2 years, a year and a half of just contagion.
Yeah, but it speaks to something that's really key, which is that at the very early years of hip hop, we had women performers. That, you know, the fact that we have our Doja Cats and Dej Loafs and Rhapsodies today speaks to a continuity of tradition that's been there from the very beginning. Whether it was you know, some of the originators like Roxanne Shante, whether it was you know, some of these, you know, Funky 4+1 that had women MCs. Women have been part of this hip hop culture and part of MCing and shaping the art of MCing, from MC Lyte to Queen Latifah and beyond. And an important part of where hip hop is going today has to do with, you know, people from all different identity formations, all different gender identities, gender expressions, and so forth, grabbing a mic and using it to do what it's meant to do, which is to make your voice heard in the broadest possible context. But yeah, any more thoughts on women and hip hop? We have about a minute left. 2 minutes
in a minute. Okay, double answer. The Roxanne Wars, as far as I know, are not still going on, although I'm sure like somewhere on SoundCloud there's a little micro phenomenon. But I think there's something interesting it's kind of similar, just transposed, which is like a big song will drop and then tons and tons of rappers will just record raps over the same beat. I think that's a really interesting way of sort of displaying theme and variations in a way that can be adversarial, in a way that can be collaborative, in much the way that the Roxanne Wars were. More about women in hip hop, I don't have like a good soundbite version of it, but to go back to your question about the assignment, about rappers to check out, I think,
please.
Young M.A. is a rapper who I'm super excited by. Lake Haley 47, who has a new album coming out soon. Cash Doll, I think they're all, Dreezy, who's a rapper from Chicago, who I mentioned briefly earlier. They're all just super talented in different ways. And like, I think among them and the whatever rabbit holes they'll lead you down, you'll find a lot of just interesting, like the way that the Dej Loaf video is sort of a retort to anyone who has these stereotypes about rap. I think just to show the full variety and diversity and vibrancy of what's happening in rap made by women, and just period. I think that's where I would recommend starting.
Wonderful. Well, what a great way to end this rich conversation. And you know, I was so glad to be a part of celebrating this book, which you all have to get. Thanks as well to our host tonight. It's just been wonderful to be with Greenlight, and we look forward to you know, future conversations.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thanks to Greenlight. Thank you, everyone else.
Daniel and Adam, thank you so much for that great discussion. That was so wonderful. And I want to thanks to everybody for joining us. Don't forget to buy your copy of What's Good in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. The link is in the chat. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.